Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Ollie Richards, and this is a podcast all about language learning. So whether you're learning your first language or you're a seasoned polyglot, what I try to do here is to bring my experience of learning lots of languages, some well, some awfully, and a lot kind of somewhere in between to help you with your own language learning journey. Now, today we're going to talk about a very, very common but very important question, which is when is the right time to start speaking. But before we get on to that, I want to let you know that this is actually a part of a new experiment that I'm doing where I'm actually broadcasting these podcast recordings live on YouTube. So if you are someone who's into YouTube, then you might want to sign up to kind of get these live, because then it's more of an interactive version, because what happens is you can sort of watch me record. In fact, there are people now, there are about 30 people. No, hang on. How many people? Let me just check. Over here, there are, 50 people. That's cool. Actually watching this recording live, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end as well. So it's like more of an interactive version of the podcast. So if you like to do that, then head over to YouTube, search for Ollie Richards, and subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications as well, because when you turn on those notifications, then you will get notified, appropriately enough, about when the live sessions are happening. So there we go. All right, then. So today's question is, when is the right time to start speaking? I've had so many variations of this question come in over the years, but it's come up a lot recently. And so what I thought I'd do is kind of break this down into a couple of parts, right? First of all, talk about why this question gets asked in the first place, and then talk about the theory behind when is the right time to speak, because there's some very interesting theory here. And then also, what are various people's experiences of that in reality? Because I do think that this is one of those topics where the theory and the reality say two quite different things. So first of all, why ask this question in the first place? Well, I think when people ask this question about when is the right time to ask speaking, there are generally two reasons why this would happen, right? So the first one is about people who are interested in the theory of when is the right time to start speaking. And these are people who often, are kind of serial language learners, and they just kind of take an interest in the question of, what is there an ideal time to actually be speaking? And then the second group of people who are interested in this kind of thing are those who are actually struggling with something related to this. And often, in my experience, this is people who have social anxiety of some kind, and find that the fact that they are kind of being pushed by their language classes, by people on the internet, whatever, to start speaking is actually making them quite uncomfortable. And so those are the two reasons that I see these questions being asked. So first of all, let's take a little bit of a look at the theory behind this. So the theory behind when is the right time to speak a language, my reading of the theory is basically that there are lots of different methods and no conclusive evidence, so don't pay too much attention to the theory behind this. So I'll characterize it in two different ways, right? So first of all, there was a method that was very common in the post-war period called the audiolingual method, and this is still taught today in various different places, and it is. But the way that the audiolingual method works is it's basically a lot of repetition. So you'll listen to sentences and then you'll speak them right away, and so a lot of just direct repetition of stuff that you hear, really. And the idea behind that method originally was it would train people to be kind of ground ready. So when you hit the ground, you can already kind of speak and respond to people in quite a kind of mechanical but effective way. And according to this method, basically you're speaking from day one because they want you to be completely ready. So that's an example of how speaking from the beginning is viewed as a good, effective way to learn. Now, there was also a method that was pioneered in the 70s called the silent way. And this was, who was it? It was Gatino, I think. Now, I'm not sure if he was Romanian or something like that. But the whole idea behind this approach to teaching was there's no speaking at all. And he would have you do things like literally just sit in silence and observe for months on end. And the idea would be then that your brain kind of forms the knowledge of the language by itself, and then when it comes time to speak afterwards, then you already know what you need to know, right? And then if you think about modern language teaching, if you walk into a language school now, the way that you're going to be taught most likely is with something called the communicative approach. And the communicative approach is basically, well, let's kind of teach you a few words and phrases, set a scenario, and then practice with your partner, that kind of thing. And I think that the reason that is taught is simply because in most cases it's kind of a middle ground where students kind of know what to expect. Most students going into a language class, for better or for worse, they kind of expect, well, I think we should be speaking, we should be practicing. And so often the reality of the language industry is if you just kind of give students what they expect, you can't go far wrong. And so that's what happens. Now, I have my own views on when the right time is to start speaking, but I'm not going to tell you just yet, because I do think that it has to be a much more personal choice. But I will tell you that a little bit later. And then we get to people's actual experience of what it's like to speak at different points. Now, if you are an outgoing person, if you're an extrovert, if you enjoy kind of chatting and communicating with people, then you're never going to ask the question, like, when is the right time to start speaking? You're never going to ask that question because you'll just naturally do it anyway. I mean, I am someone who I love speaking with people. I learn languages for communication, for speaking. That's my main objective. And so I just naturally like to speak from the beginning. I don't mind kind of mangling the language so much. It's by personality. However, there's a big group of people out there, and these people often get disregarded, I think. They have a feeling of being somewhat invisible in the language community, which are people who, whether you describe them as being shy or have social anxiety or whatever, these are people who, because of the kind of status quo in the language learning system, often get put on the spot and say, right, now speak. We've been studying this grammar, now speak it. You've learned all these phrases, now use them. Find a partner, start speaking. And for a lot of people, this is very, very anxiety-inducing, because it can be embarrassing, right? Trying to speak in a language when you're not quite ready. And so I think this question often gets asked by people who do have a kind of social anxiety, and they're kind of wondering, well, is it okay if I don't speak just yet? Is that actually a problem? What's the reality here? Am I really shooting myself in the foot if I don't start speaking right at the beginning? And so what's best then? Because you've got different methods, different theories, and different people. So what is the answer to this? When is the right time to start speaking? I think the way to arrive at the answer to this is by doing two things. The first thing is to ignore the theory. And the reason here is, academics will shoot me all over the world, but the reality is that the theory and the science about language learning basically tells us nothing any of the time. We just don't know how languages are learned, and it's such a personal thing that I think any theory that says you have to do this, you have to do that, any dogma should be is for the birds. I also think you should ignore what other people say, because if you are introverted or you have social anxiety of some kind, the people that you see on the internet talking about language learning, it's a case of who shouts loudest gets heard, right? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so you'll get people saying, yeah, speak from day one, start speaking right now, all of these things. And so there's an inherent bias there, because whatever your personal situation, you're going to get exposed to people who are telling you, hey, you have to start speaking right now. And so my basic message is that I think you have to have the courage to do whatever feels right. I was actually speaking with a business coaching student earlier on today about exactly this. It was a similar thing, but relating to business. And she was saying that, she's kind of quite torn between different options and different avenues. And one of the things I said was that you have to trust yourself. You have to not fight who you are. All right. And so my observations around this are as follows. If you ask, for me, if you want my personal opinion, I'm going to give you that now. But I have to kind of pepper this by saying, I've just spent the last 5 minutes telling you to ignore any kind of dogma. And so you should feel completely free to ignore what I'm about to tell you. But I am aware that always saying, oh, well, it depends, can be pretty unhelpful advice. So following now, I'm going to tell you my personal perspective on what I think is best on the whole, but feel free to ignore all of this, all right? This is my message. What I'm about to tell you is not gospel, it's just my view, so take it or leave it. My thoughts on the right time to start speaking are as follows. Number one, if you're learning a new language, you can't speak if you don't know anything in the language, right? So, for that reason, as a point of principle, we should learn stuff first and speak later. You can't speak a language in your first week and actually do anything meaningful with it. So learn first and speak later. That seems to be self-evident to me. My second observation is that social anxiety is a big deal and it really affects us as people. So there should be no pressure to speak. It is not a given that you have to start speaking from the beginning. So don't let anyone tell you have to start speaking from the beginning. It might work for them, doesn't necessarily work for you. With that being said, it's also true that the single biggest problem I ever come across in language learning is people who are so scared of speaking that they never ever start. And that's equally a big problem. Because if you never actually get to speaking, then you will never learn to speak fluently. I've made a video on this a few weeks ago when I was talking about how actually the secret to speaking fluently is a lot of speaking. You've got to actually be speaking. And there are a lot of people who, when they hear this for the first time, realize, man, it never occurred to me earlier. I was just trying to study my way to fluency. Doesn't happen. You've got to, at some point, start speaking. So my prescription, Dr. Richard's prescription for when to start speaking is as follows. First of all, spend significant time actually learning some stuff in the language. This could be 1 month, 2 months, could be 6 months. When I learned Italian a few years back and documented the whole thing on YouTube, for those of you who are interested, I spent the first month doing nothing but reading. All right? So spend time with an input-based method like StoryLearning, where you are just getting lots of input in the language. So you're learning stuff, you're filling up your brain with stuff in the language, words, phrases, grammar, things like that. Number two, when you feel ready, start to transition to speaking with a bias towards starting to speak slightly earlier than you feel comfortable, because you're never going to feel comfortable. And then when you do that, then you simply use the material that you've been reading or listening to as the basis for your speaking session. So you find somebody who you're comfortable speaking with. It could be a tutor or a friend, and then just talk about the things that you have been reading or listening to. That way it's nice and controlled. And the third thing then after that is to simply continue in that vein. And you're going to be spending most of your time reading and listening, because that's what you can do anytime. But then you must also spend some good regular time actually speaking, because at the end of the day, when all is said and done, if you're not regularly speaking, you will never learn to speak fluently. And probably the worst of all outcomes is that you never start speaking because you're too afraid of it, because then the game is it is lost. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully that's not too jumbled. Thank you to those of you who have asked this question over the recent weeks and months. If you would like to ask me a question, you can leave me a voice note that I play on the podcast, and you can actually, and then I'll reply directly to your question. If you'd like to do that, you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. That's iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask, and you can leave me a question there. So that's it for today. I've got a massive wasp just buzzing around. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast. There we go, guys. All right, then. I've got to get rid of this wasp before he goes crazy. So I'm going to come back in a second and answer these questions, but not before I open the window. So give me a sec. I tell you, there's nothing worse than having a massive grey microphone in front of your face and a wasp buzzing around literally right there. And there you go. So, questions. Let's see what you've got for me. All right. Cheers, everybody. So Sorish asks, what exactly is fluency? So I think for most practical purposes, fluency is just the ability. Well, that's me how I define fluency. For me, fluency is the ability to sit down in a bar and have a conversation with somebody without them not enjoying it. All right? I want to be able to sit in a pub with somebody, have a drink, and for us to be able to equally enjoy the conversation without anyone having any kind of undue stress or strain. That for me is conversational fluency, and that's what I aim for. We can go back and forth on the definition of fluency, but for me, when you can have a comfortable conversation with somebody and they want to be there, then yeah, that's my kind of working definition. Joel says, I think you need to get a safe space to start speaking. Yeah, exactly. It's super important. And you can find that, I don't like the term safe space for other reasons. I don't think safe spaces are a good thing. But when it comes to actually practicing speaking, yes, we want to find a place where we can practice speaking and not be judged. A place where we can make mistakes and for that to be cool. So, but I should go back to the top because any earlier messages I will have missed. So, we've got some interesting comments on the audio here. Rune says perfect audio. Was it perfect audio? And then we had someone earlier said the audio's crap. So Joel says don't get too close to the mic. Maybe you guys could let me know whether the audio was okay there, because normally I get quite close like this, but maybe I've turned the gain up too much. If I'm like this, is the audio okay? Maybe you can let me know. I don't know if that's the same everywhere. Right, so Ibrahim here says basically this is my, he shares my perspective here, right? Which is that the right time to start speaking is when I'm able to understand native speakers effortlessly. This is such an important point because think about it. If you start speaking in the first few weeks, even if you memorize some phrases and can parrot those phrases, you're not going to understand what they say back to you. So really, what's the point? I mean, again, if you get off on that, then that's great. But many people don't, so you absolutely don't need to. Hey, Mark, good to see you. Mark's been a long-time supporter, and great to see you here. So Lip says, I am a huge introvert. I'm even afraid to talk to my reflection. Yeah, well, Lips, you're not alone. Hopefully one of the things that I've raised some awareness of here is that we are all different. And there are many people, yes, you wouldn't know this from kind of following videos on the internet, but there are many people who really have difficulty in speaking with people for reasons of anxiety and stuff. So we can't run away from that. We've got to embrace that. And so for this reason, especially, and for people like yourself, Lips, if there is fear involved in this, then don't fight it. You must not feel like you should be speaking with people. Right, then what are the questions do we have? This is great. This I'm really pleased to see this, Ahmed. Introvert who found it very hard to speak at the beginning, but has beaten social anxiety and become a teacher. Power to you, man. That's fantastic. Well done. We need people like you. Mark says he has italki lessons, but has to try to swerve speaking to my teacher. Yeah, avoiding speaking to your teacher. Having lessons and avoiding speaking to your teacher. That's an interesting one. So Lip says, I need to find comprehensible input material for Italian. Any suggestions? I have Ollie's Italian book, but I'm not ready for that yet. Well, Lips, I have Italian Uncovered is my beginner's course for Italian. So that is, I'm not sure whether you've been through that or not, but that is designed for complete beginners. And once you finish that course, you should be ready for my books. So you might want to have a look at that. Otherwise, you might want to just kind of look at some beginner textbooks, ones with dialogues in, and follow those. All right. Any more questions, guys? Go ahead and type them in. Simon says, lovely space you have there. Thank you, Simon. Although I've The problem with doing videos here on my webcam is I realize how messy everything is. Well, it's not that messy. It's actually quite clear. But I'm in the process of actually getting the whole space designed. So it's going to be very, very good very soon. So does your advice change for different languages? Well, actually, yes, it does, because there are some languages which I think objectively, especially languages which are more spoken, I think you probably do have to get to grips with speaking earlier. These would be languages like Cantonese, like Brazilian Portuguese, like Arabic dialects. I think that because it's so difficult to kind of get quality written versions of those languages, I think you probably do have to start speaking earlier. But that's not necessarily because that's the best method. It's just purely out of practicality, you know. This is a great question. Do you need a perfect accent to be fluent? Absolutely not. I mean, I consider myself fluent in multiple languages. I don't have a perfect accent in any of them. What is a perfect accent? We have three I Will Teach You a Language team members here on the chat. We've got John, Lisa, and myself. We all have different accents. Lisa has a South African accent. John has a silky, John, is it a West Coast accent? I know you live on the West Coast. Do you have a West Coast accent? Not sure. And then I have obviously a British accent. Which one is the perfect accent? Well, obviously it's mine, right? But you know what I mean. You get the point. Okay. So Brian says, I've learned just a bit about the ideas of explicit and implicit knowledge. I see how that applies to grammar well enough. Do these ideas inform this topic of when to start speaking? I think that's a good question. I don't think so in any meaningful way, just because the problem is that this is such abstract territory here that it's very difficult to take concepts of explicit and implicit knowledge and draw direct conclusions from that as to, as when you have such and such degree of implicit knowledge, then you can start speaking. It's just not here's the thing with language learning. Real life just rings around theory because the theory can't cater for all our individual differences and circumstances and situations and things like that. So, but the broader point is, I think I don't see much value in just learning a bunch of phrases from a textbook and then starting to parrot them. I mean, if you get satisfaction from that, then great. But from a learning perspective, you haven't internalized anything yet. So I don't see much value in that. But I do acknowledge that there are lots of people that just find that very fun, in which case it's all good. Yeah, the audio seems to be fine, so I'm not sure what that earlier comment was about. But good to hear. Right, a couple more questions then before we sign off. I'm going to choose some which are on topic. Right, I like this. So Tiago says, do you think it's a problem if I don't use Anki or any other type of SRS program? No problem at all. You do not have to use flashcards. You do not have to do it. And again, like you say here, I feel like I should do it, but I just don't continue doing it. Well, that's it. I mean, listen, trust yourself. Don't fight yourself, really. Pay attention to what you enjoy, what works for you, and do more of that. Just because someone else on some YouTube channel says you should use SRS does not make it so. So Sweet Melody, what a name. I can feel comfortable talking with the teacher, but when it comes to friends, due to not speaking fluidly, we end up speaking English instead of the target language. How do I get past it? The way you get past it is by not having a teacher, but having a speaking partner. This could be a friend, could be a language exchange, could be an italki tutor, someone who you can practice speaking with in a kind of safe environment. All right? So this is not taking lessons, this is just practicing speaking. Practice, and then there will come a point where you speak better than your friends do in English, and then that's how you do it. You've got to get to a point where... See, the reason that your friends speak to you in English probably is because their English is better than your target language is, right? So you've just simply got to get your target language to a level where it's more comfortable than in English. Joel says, Krashen alludes to self-generated comprehensible input, and I'm convinced I've seen people acquire their own mistakes. Maybe just don't trust our own output, leverage the effective filter. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Like, I love Krashen, as you know. I've interviewed Krashen before. I think he's one of the most helpful theorists when it comes to language learning. But if the language learning journey is an entire football pitch, let me get my hand in here we go. Follow me with the metaphor here, guys. If the language learning journey is an entire football pitch, the theory accounts for the first yard of that distance, and then practice and real life gets you the rest of the way. Right? So I think it can be interesting to talk about the theory, but ultimately it helps us very little. I think what helps us is understanding our own bias, our own way that we learn. That's what helps us. All right. Picasso says Duolingo is the best. Am I allowed to disagree with Picasso? I don't know. All right then. Let's have one more here. This is interesting. So G says, I've been on Tandem, but the people that talk to me start asking for investments. What do you mean investments? Like investments of time or flus? John says, obviously the West Coast US accent is the ultimate flavor of English. Yeah, the West Coast US accent is kind of like a fruit beer to my Chateauneuf de Pape. If you'll allow me that analogy. All right then, what have we got? I am speaking a standard British accent. Some people think I'm kind of got a posh accent. Some people think I'm Australian. But there you go. Who knows? Yeah, so good question from Joe. So Joe says, this is a great idea, this Q&A. Well done. Thank you, Joe. He says, how can I make my speaking classes more valuable? It feels like I'm talking about the same things a lot. Yeah, this is a big problem with speaking sessions. There comes a point that at the beginning, you get really, you feel like you're learning a lot. But then before long, you realize you're just kind of on autopilot, right? What I would do, I would introduce new material into the sessions. So if you're doing reading, if you're doing lots of reading, which I hope you are, then take something you've read and bring it into the session. What this allows you to do is introduce a new topic in there, but also recycle a lot of the vocabulary that you've been learning from that input, right? So so it gives you a structured way to improve. Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate it. Thank you, Rune. Okay, guys, I think that's it. Good to see all of you. Cheers. If you're not subscribed to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast, then what are you playing at? Get your phone out, open your podcast app, subscribe to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast, send me a voice note to reply to play on a future podcast. I will teach you a language.com/ask. And then I'll see you then. It's Friday night, so I'm off.